Hello, my name is Thomas Rankin, and this is my final project for Intro to Asian Studies. My topic is Were the Samurai Knights the greatest warriors ever? And this is such a very broad topic that it could be discussed on many different cultures that span around the world at this time, and different warrior classes that existed throughout a very vast timeline of human history. However, I'm going to be discussing and comparing the differences and the similarities between the European medieval knight and the samurai warrior class. And I'm doing this because both of these warrior elites existed on the same time frame historically, and also because they existed within the same kind of political system of a feudal system where it was very a hierarchy kind of system where the knights and samurais were held at a very high standard on the social and political structure. I, I'm comparing them, both these warrior elites, by training, um, and I'm also going to be comparing them by warfare and also by honor. Starting us off would be training. The samurais trained at a very young age. They trained at about 3 with wooden sticks. They fought in very basic um, sword fighting fencing techniques. However, by age 5 to 7, they'll be learning more serious combat um, weaponry. It is around this age that they would also be sent off to either a relative or a fencing instructor, where they would be become the apprentice to the mentor. Um, so this existed um, very similar to the European medieval knights, in such that um, boys in medieval Europe to noble high standing were sent off at a very young age to other knights in the knightly class to become their squires, in which they learned uh, combat techniques, um, and code of honors. For the European knights, it was um, chivalry. For the samurai warriors, it was a term called bushido, way of the warrior. Uh, in the case of warfare between the two, the samurais typically fought on foot, and while the European medieval knights typically fought in cavalry. In fact, the word chivalry is a derivative of cavalry. Cavalry. So it was very a symbol almost for the medieval European knight to be on horseback rather than be on foot. While in Japan, um, typically samurais, would fight on foot, even though they could have, and often sometimes did, fight on horseback. However, it wasn't such a driving force as, let's say, the European um knightly charge. It wasn't using mass numbers and mass force, uh, which leads us right along to the different kind of warfare and tactics and weaponry that they used during this time. Uh, Medieval European knights used a double-edged longsword that was straight. It was, and also various different weapons, halberds, spears, um, pole arms, uh, anything that was relevant during the time period they used typically. However, the sword was considered the most elite, symbol of the knight, considering it was very costly to make and it was very useful in battle. And very similar to this was the fact that, samurai very valued their sword, which was the katana. And it was a single-edged blade, typically with a slight curve, used two-handed. And it was, it, while the Europeans typically over time started valuing the thrust over the cuts, And while armor improved, the katana in medieval all the way through Japan's history stayed the same. It valued the cutting capacity, um, regardless of armor. Typically, with the system of honors for each warrior class, um, was very similar in the code of conduct and the very basic rule following. However, both differed very greatly if you look in detail on what they were kind of like, what they were kind of getting at. The samurais kind of followed a system of calmness, politeness, honest behavior, following orders, which was exactly what the knightly class of the European medieval knights followed, which was chivalry. And it consisted of very much the same ideas. However, they split apart and diverge on the fact that the Japanese valued honor greater than death. Death to them was kind of like a known fact. You were going to die for either your shogun or your emperor or whoever was your leader. It was expected that you would die on the battlefield or you would, commit ritual suicide, seppuku, if you retreated or disobeyed orders. It was very looked down upon if you kind of valued life more than your honor or your family. While in medieval Europe, the system was a little bit more different. It was more based upon the fact that European medieval knights typically were valued a little bit more alive than dead in the society, uh, and they were also worth a lot more because when captured, when subdued, soldiers would normally take a knight captive and then ransom him back to the kingdom from which he came to get money, which kind of goes against what was believed would be in medieval Japan at the time. So both of the systems were very different in that kind of way. In conclusion, I feel that both of these warrior classes were very similar in a lot of ways. Uh, it's kind of unfair to assume that one would be better than the other, um, especially when you take out the context of the situation or time period that they would be historically fighting at. Um, I view both the samurai and the European medieval knights as kind of equals to each other and very similar on a lot of bases. And that concludes my analysis.